Okay, take two. I'm glad that happened in the first 5 minutes. Ran out of memory and the recording froze, but at least it was at the beginning. Hello, British and American culture students. This is the last class for this semester. The good news is we're on chapter 8 and it's not very long. So I do want to cover everything that I have on the board because some of you were absent on Friday for various reasons, illness or participation in the performance, which I hope went well. So we're going to cover the basics of the, way American culture looks now and just not worry about the British stuff. Like I said, I've never made it all the way to chapter 8 before, so we have been focusing on America since the Revolution, except for, remember, about imperialism and Victorian culture. We talked about that, and we talked about World War I, and of course, Great Britain was at one point the only power preventing Hitler from expanding further. It was in the Blitz. It was just the United Kingdom against Germany, and America was not in the war yet. So 1940 was time for Winston Churchill to shine. You may not appreciate other aspects of his character. I sure don't. He was an imperialist, but he's a hero for the free world simply because of his opposition to the expansion of fascism in Europe. So he's in chapter 7, but we're going to move on to chapter 8, and I didn't put any questions about Churchill on the exam. I have the exam off screen here, which I'm going to glance at periodically just to make sure that I've covered everything. The exam's not supposed to be full of surprises. It's just supposed to give you a chance to demonstrate how much you've learned about British and American culture over this class. I think that's fair, and that's all I want to do. So another piece of good news is that there's only, unlike your quizzes where there was 5 options, on the multiple choice on the exam there's 4. Okay, so maybe that'll cheer you up when you're studying this week. When you're watching this video, there's 40 multiple choice and there's 4 choices, A, B, C, and D. You have to fill out the scan sheet like you did on the midterm. And then there's 2 bigger questions where you have to explain larger concepts like industrialization or imperialism or American ideals. So I'll talk about the ideals quickly first before we go to chapter 8, because that is one of the major things that we covered before we talked about the presidents. The presidents you can read about in chapter 7. Pretty much everything I said is there. I threw in a couple stories that aren't there, but those are not on the exam. They're just to help you remember who the person is. I mean, when I was telling you about John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon being the first presidents to be on television, in a televised debate, and I talked about Richard Nixon's, unshaven face and his dark circles around his eyes, because he didn't know, how important it was to look good on television. Take 3, but I'm not going to delete the first 4-minute fragment because that was going well. I'm just going to keep going. I ran out of memory again. Apparently, after you delete a file, you have to go to the deleted folder and then delete it again, which is cool because if you make an accident, you can go and get it back. However, in this case, a little bit frustrating. So let's keep going from there. If the fragment isn't attachable, I'm just going to stick it up as the introduction to the lecture. Like I was about to say, Richard Nixon didn't know about lighting or camera technology or memory or anything. Not that there was this kind of easy, like one-man thing where you could put a camera on a stand and record yourself. None of that technology was around. So in 1960, John F. Kennedy had, I guess, he's younger, tanned, probably had some makeup done, the lighting just right, and had sort of more of a sense of what it, how important it was to look good on television. So some people, some people watch it on television. Some people listen to it on the radio. And the interesting thing is, the people who watched the debate thought that John F. Kennedy was, had won, and the people who listened to it thought Nixon had won. So things were never the same for politicians after that. There's been a lot of changes in the competition and how it works. Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin. That's not on the exam either, but I mentioned that because no president will be born in a log cabin, and self-educated, I think, ever again. I could be wrong, but Abraham Lincoln was able to rise from this obscurity, right? He was actually not born in Indiana, although that's where he made his career. If I'm not mistaken, he was born down in Tennessee or something. Yeah, I might be wrong about that. Don't quote me on it. But Abraham Lincoln grew up without a lot of money and a lot of support, and he's a self-made man, and he rose to the absolute top of society. That's something that is unique in American society almost, because he was elected. He didn't seize power. There's lots of people who have been peasants and become the emperor or the king even. There's lots of stories like that, but it's not the same as Abraham Lincoln's sort of educated, elected progress. And Lincoln fits perfectly into these American ideals that I mentioned. Dr. Allen Guelzo, I wrote his name properly. I'm not sure if I spelled it right in lecture, but he's a famous American history professor. He's written lots of books, and he's actually British. And I think he's actually a specialist in multiple areas. So he doesn't know a lot about Victorianism and British, history as well. But I listened to his lecture on the 20th century American, cultural developments, and I thought he was fantastic. And one of the things that I thought was great about his explanation was that he started his lecture by saying these are fundamental principles of American culture that they hang on to and they resist, right? Whatever happens, whatever way you argue it, freedom is... Okay, continuing. Sorry about all these technical difficulties. I'm going to keep going. I don't know why it keeps freezing at 4 minutes, but that's not good. Allen Guelzo focuses on our attention on these three American ideals, which I think is a really useful way to look at American culture, whether it's a history class or a cultural studies class or a literature class, or an American studies class, whatever you're into. I know Asian studies is growing at our university as well. So it's not like we're going to break down everything according to these things, but what happened was in class, I asked, can anybody guess what do you think the 5 ideals are that I'm going to suggest? And the first one student said freedom right away. So it's clear that's what, not just that what Americans think, Americans concentrate on freedom, but that people from other countries, because I'm not American either, although I'm North American, so in a sense I am an American, just I don't live in the United States of America. But American culture is as familiar to me as Canadian culture is in some ways, and British culture is definitely. So freedom is there's lots of definitions, there's lots of ways to express freedom, and Americans use pretty much all of them. There's a lot of contradictions, though, as I mentioned in class. There's millions of people in prison in America, and that's not a country. That's not if you're talking about literal freedom, that's servitude and in some cases slavery and incarceration, right? You can't leave, you can't go, you can't set your own schedule. It's literally taking away your freedom. So that's not an example of American freedom in that case. education is a kind of means to get more freedom because some people call the United States the land of opportunity, that the opportunities present themselves through a good education. That's a lot of countries in Asia focus on education even more than Americans do. So sometimes it looks like their attention to education is not as serious, but it's just manifests itself in a different way. Education is a means to an end. It's not a measure of status unto itself. So an American will usually not hesitate to tell you which college they come from, right? Which university they attended. They will say it without hesitation. Same in Canada. It doesn't matter if you went to Harvard or Yale or Stanford or the University of Iowa. I don't even know if there is a University of Iowa. Iowa State, Alabama, the University of Alabama. Not a highly respected school in terms of education, but a perennial football power. So everybody knows the University of Alabama because they have some crazy football fans, and their football team is always one of the best in the country. So universities and colleges get reputations in America just like everywhere else, but everybody's proud of something different. So there's no hesitation to say, oh, I didn't go to Seoul National University or Goryeo or Yonsei, so I'm embarrassed that I went to a local college. Like Chungnam's a big university, so is KAIST, but we have universities in Daejeon which are smaller, like Hanam or Usong or Mogwan. And sometimes adults don't want to share that information, which is not the way. Okay. Sorry for the extreme close-up there. This is probably the most trouble I've ever had with recording. Even during COVID, it wasn't this bad, but my camera is freezing at 4 minutes every time I record. So it was on reverse angle camera. I switched it around. I can't see what I'm doing right now because I can't see the screen. So hopefully this looks good when I'm done. I'm just gonna stick all of these together and hope that it doesn't bother you too much. I'm sorry about that. I don't have a professional cameraman to help me out. So it's just me and my camera stand and my phone doing its thing. Not well today. So continuing. These other aspects, Americans pride themselves on being the first modern democracy of any real significance. Of course, there was democracies throughout history, and America gradually evolved into one. But in 1776, they were not really fully a constitutional monarchy yet. So the Americans made that sudden jump during their war, coming out of it in 1783 as a republic, and no longer a part of the British Empire, but a large, fast developing country and a future superpower. And it's based not on authoritarian practices or imperialism, although they do become sort of a imperial hybrid, just like the Roman Republic did towards its end. Through its expansion across the world. We'll talk about that hopefully later. It is an experiment. They refer to America as the Great Experiment. That's how some people refer to it in its early days. And so they continue. They're innovative. You can look at this in many different ways. The whole culture itself is an experiment though, because it really hadn't been done before. One of the unique things about America is the way its political system works, in that no matter how bitter the rivalry between the parties or the individual candidates, they've always successfully transferred power from one president to the next. Now, I've mentioned Donald Trump too much in this class, but he really tested the system by claiming that the election was a fraud, but he was stopped in continuing to hold office by the system itself, the bureaucracy and the continuation of the system, and the military's refusal to cooperate with the political leadership, enabled a peaceful transition of power again. And so it's been challenged many times. We talked about the American Civil War, and John Madison turning over power to Thomas Jefferson in 1800. These were moments where people weren't sure if America was going to survive, but it did. And that has to do with popular government and its experimental progress, its developments as a political and social experiment. Its special status, I mentioned, it's something sometimes that might irritate other people. It doesn't really bother me. Canadians have a good sense of humor, and Americans make fun of us a lot. It's sort of a big brother, little brother relationship, but certainly Big Brother America is very proud of itself. And I think they have a lot of reasons to be proud, but showing it too much, we call that arrogance, and that sometimes that's the way it manifests itself. But manifest destiny is another way. It is just what they believed from the beginning, that they were a city on a hill and that they were world leaders from the beginning. And it's America's destiny to be a great country and to be a global power. And other countries have this idea too. The British did also. They came to believe, the Spanish Armada is a great example, that God was a Protestant Englishman, and that they had a destiny to rule the oceans. From their island, they could be a beacon of light to the rest of the world. That's why British and American people sort of identify with each other. They are still tied to each other in a lot of ways. Same but different is, I guess, what we say. Lots of contradictions in these, but Americans love contradictions. That's what you did your second assignment on. Okay, we made it to the second side, which is the parts included in chapter 8, especially the aspect of America that we haven't talked about too much in detail, which is what we call the American system. The American system is based on republicanism. There's the American Republic has 3 branches, which is in principle would be balanced, and when one gets too powerful, the other two prevent it from dominating. This again goes back to sort of Roman ideas of, there was always 2 presidents, there was 2 consuls in the Roman Republic. So if one of them was injured or one of them was gone, then the second one would automatically take over, but they would always sort of balance each other off. The Americans don't do that so much, but they do have a president and a vice president. And if something happens to the president, the vice president automatically becomes president, right? Like if something happens to Biden, Kamala Harris would automatically become the first African-American woman, the first woman and the first African-American woman simultaneously. I think one of her parents is Indian and the other one is African-American. And I wouldn't have a problem with that. That would be another experiment. But the principle is that the legislative branch, which is the elected groups, the Congress and the Senate, which are both elected, those lower house and the upper house, they debate everything. It goes through them by vote. Sometimes it requires a majority, and in certain rare cases, a supermajority, which is 2/3 of the vote. And the executive, the president, finalizes it. The president has certain powers, like he can do things by executive order, which means he can make things happen quickly and efficiently by personally signing off on it. But big things, declarations of war, for example, you can do military operations, but you can't declare war without the approval of Congress, for example. So the political system, these 3 branches, that's in chapter 8, so you should read that and you should know what these 3 mean. Legislative is the elected part. The judicial system is the Supreme Court, which now has 9 members. So they always have a vote of 5-4 or 6. It's always, a narrow majority or there's only usually a yes or no vote after the Supreme Court justices to make their decision. So it's just things are passed or blocked. And that's sort of the role of the judiciary, is to make sure the legislative branch and the executive branch don't misbehave. They review serious cases that need to be compared to precedent, legal precedent, and of course the most important document in the American system is the Constitution. So constitutional issues are handled by the Supreme Court justices. The executive, of course, I said already, that's the President of the United States. In terms of entertainment, I think leisure activities are something that Americans treasure, and that they are businesses, and they're enormously expensive and complicated. They are the ones that have the most music, the most singers, the most famous music is American. Lots of other countries make great music, but in terms of the popularity of it, just the scale of America in all of these aspects, they're just the biggest, right? They're the biggest democratic system in the world. China and India. I mean, India is sort of democratic. I shouldn't say they're not, but they haven't been for very long, and their system has some issues with it. It's clear China's not a democratic system. They're communist, but they've sort of adapted their communism to a special sort of Chinese version of it, but it's not a democratic system. So they're the largest. Entertainment it's about size, a lot of it, right? So music and sports and cinema, these are the things that I don't talk about that much, because I think you guys all know them. You've all seen Netflix and Disney Plus. You know about streaming, which is a combination of technology and entertainment. If you ever go to the United States, I encourage you to watch a basketball game or a baseball game or a football game or a hockey game, whatever you like, or golf or tennis. Americans just do sports, and they're very enthusiastic, and it's a fun. It is entertaining. It's expensive, and it's entertaining. I was in San Francisco last year, and I really wanted to go to Candlestick Park to see the Giants play, but it was like $150 American each seat. So I've been to the Hanwha Eagles games many times. It's fun, but it's not the same as being in a stadium with 50,000 people, and the stadium is full, and people are hitting home runs into the water over the wall and stuff like that, into the bay, into San Francisco Bay. People kayak out there hoping that somebody hits a huge home run and they can catch it. It's just a great time. We talked about cinema a lot, so don't forget the Hollywood stuff that I lectured on a week ago. That will certainly be on the exam. Technology. Space is one of the things that America is famous for. They had the space race with the Soviet Union, which the Soviet Union was winning, let's remember. They won the space race effectively, but then the Americans went to the moon and sort of leapfrogged them, and everybody forgot about the fact that the Soviet Union actually put an astronaut into space before Armstrong landed on the moon and proclaimed one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Legendary stuff, but really sort of a diplomatic coup to make America look better, and so that everybody would ignore the fact that they actually lost getting, to space first. It's sort of an embarrassment that they recovered on, to be honest. But that happened long before I was born and long before you were born, and they haven't been back to the moon for a long time. There is a program in NASA right now called Back to the Moon, and they do want to do the first Mars mission, but who knows who's going to be the first to do that. We talked about television, how its impact on cinema, so don't forget about that. Transportation, I mentioned Henry Ford briefly. He's not in the textbook and he's not on the exam, but the transportation revolution and the mass production, this is a technology thing too, where the industrial power of the United States eclipsed anything the world had ever seen. Now China has a similar amount of industrial power, and we all know how amazing that is, how many things they can produce. That was those industrial techniques were invented by Americans. So they still have that industrial capacity. It's just shifting towards different things. Anyway, we can't get too deep into that, but economics, we talked about Adam Smith and capitalism, the invisible hand, the free market. Obviously, the American market is the biggest market in the world. I keep mentioning China, and China's the second. Things are changing, and in the textbook you'll read about the development. I mentioned just briefly the fact that China and Japan and Korea, the Asian tigers, I think somebody referred to them the tiger economies. East Asia has three of the biggest economies in the world now. 100 years ago, they were not even close. But now, Korea's maybe 12th or 13th in the world, and Japan and China are at the top, in the top 5. So they're part of that. The reason that their economies are so developed is because of the partnerships with American economy, and the American economy has been the largest for since World War II, since they overtook the British Empire. Some of that is based on the fact that the demand for products, even when American exports slow down, their economy doesn't depend on exports because they consume so much themselves. That's one thing that insulates their economy from the global shocks that everybody else deals with. Usually everybody else, when the American economy slows down, the rest of the world's economies slow down because of its ripple effect. But the American economy can keep going independently almost. Along with that, the Great Depression, we talked about the stock market crash and how finance and banking worked. The Dutch were the ones that started the financial revolution. The British continued that, and then the Americans sort of, I guess, not perfected it, but continued it and developed it. The military, although I didn't call American imperial, because it's not technically imperial, the way that they project power and they have military bases all over the world. If you look at a map of the American military bases around the world, and then you look at a map of the British Empire, you'll see that the American military bases are even more extensively spread across the world than the British Empire was. So it's not an empire, but they do have a military network that is even more developed and extensive than the British Empire was. So whatever you want to call it, the Americans are all over the world, and they effectively veto or intercede or intervene. Right? They're not very isolationist anymore. Americans are everywhere, and they will, when conflicts flare up and they develop into full-fledged war. Sometimes, like in the case of Ukraine, the United States isn't fighting Russia directly with its own military, but they're providing the support to the Ukrainians in order to continue to fight. If they weren't, the war would be over. That's just a fact. I'm not talking about who is right or wrong or my political opinions or my personal opinions. It's just the fact that from their position, the United States can keep the war going indefinitely if they choose, as long as the Ukrainians are willing to accept their support. Of course, the military and technology, the nuclear weapons that developed in the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, which ended in 1993, but recently has started to sort of manifest itself as a, China and Russia, counterbalance to American hegemony. This is, some people are calling it the new Cold War, but I wouldn't go that far yet, and I hope it never gets that far. Drugs and medicine, I didn't write that here, but it is in the textbook. Don't worry about the drugs part. There's no questions about that, okay? It is an important thing, but we don't have time to talk about it a lot. But medicine, over-the-counter medicine or prescription medicine, and hospital care and Medicare in America is complicated. There's a lot of drugs which are illegally, distributed medicines, and there's a lot of people who are addicted to some very serious drugs in the United States. That's a big problem in their society. I mentioned that at the end as I'm sort of wrapping up all the points. There's 2 songs there, one by Asian Dub Foundation called The Real Great Britain. If you read it, you'll see the lyrics are they're great lyrics. It's very well written. If you might not like the music video or the sound. It's unique. They're basically people who have, they're second generation British rappers, and they're called Asian Dub Foundation because they're British, but ethnically they're from other places. So they've got a British accent, but they've got this unique style, and they're talking about imperialism. It's great stuff. So you read that, and you can just search it on YouTube and watch the video for free. And Rage Against the Machine, Sleep Now in the Fire. They play that song, the music video. They play it on the steps of Wall Street's stock exchange, and they get enough people, around, and they cause enough of a disturbance that they shut down the stock exchange briefly and clear people out. They're just trying to throw a wrench in the system, which is, they think Wall Street is just taking money from people and propping up this, elite imperialist regime that's disguising itself as politicians and wealthy entrepreneurs. And they're always very critical of it. It's a heavy metal, sort of rap metal song. Was my favorite band in high school. So it's a really good song as well. The world is my expense, the cost of my desire. Jesus blessed me with its future, and I protect it with fire. So raise your fists and march around. This is, I'm just saying it, but they just sing those lyrics with a lot of heavy guitar and drums and loud voices. Zach De La Rocha is the singer. I've been to one of their concerts. It's fantastic. So I hope you enjoyed this class, and I hope this recording isn't too messy for you to follow well. And I'm sorry about the technical problems, but I always enjoy this class. It's always a relief to be done, but also kind of sad that it's over so quickly. So I hope you enjoyed the class, and I wish all of you good luck on the exam. Like I said, there's no surprises. Everything that's on the exam is been highlighted by me, either in lecture in class or by directing you to read certain parts of the book. You don't have to read the whole book, but you need to know the parts that I asked you to read. So read chapter 8 and review all the other lectures. They're all still up and available on YouTube if you want to look back and watch something to remind yourself. You're able to do that. I don't take them down, so use them as you wish, and see you next week. Have a good week. Good luck on all of your exams.